Chairman. I've got a number of questions regarding the military implications of this deal. There's one other issue I want to follow up on, though. Secretary Kerry, why isn't this a treaty? And as a treaty, why isn't it subject to advice and consent with two-thirds of the Senate concurring?
Well, there are many reasons why, Senator, not the least of which is that we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran. This is a situation with a multilateral agreement with many countries, and you don't normally negotiate a treaty in that kind of context. So it's a political agreement, and we believe that the leverages that are in it through the snapback of sanctions, through the oversight and the inspections, are very powerful incentives for Iran's compliance.
What exactly do you think a treaty is? Well, I'll tell you, it's a formally concluded and ratified agreement between countries. Synonyms: agreement, settlement, pact, deal, like Iran deal.
Okay. Well, I would note that there's nothing in Article 2, Section 2 that limits the definition of treaty along the lines of what you described. And in fact, nothing in your definition of the term treaty on the State Department's own website limits it that way. It defines treaty as a formal written agreement between sovereign states or between states and international organizations. Doesn't limit it to the fact that it has to be between two. I don't think that's an adequate answer. But
thank you, Mr. Graham. You're absolutely right. John Kerry is lying through his teeth. It is absolutely a treaty by definition.
We'll move on. General Dempsey, presumably one of the weapons systems that Iran is likely to acquire and that Russia has indicated a willingness to sell would be an advanced air defense system. Can you describe for us what kind of impact this might have on U.S. military operations? For example, hostage rescue operation, reconnaissance operations, and so forth?
Yeah, there's no question, Senator. It would make application of the military option to reduce their nuclear capability more difficult, but not impossible, but more difficult.
Who'd have thunk that if you gave weapons to a state sponsor of terrorism, that it limits our ability to fight terrorism? It's a novel idea. I never would have thought of that. If the Obama administration is so dedicated to fighting terrorism like it claims, it should actually listen to the advice of the military for once.
Now, Wendy Sherman, the chief negotiator for the United States during these talks, stated in February of last year, of 2014, to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that Iranian ballistic missiles were, quote, indeed going to be part of something that would have to be addressed as part of a comprehensive agreement, close quote. Now, Secretary Kerry, at the time, was Secretary Sherman referring to lifting the UN embargo on ballistic technology when she made this statement to the Foreign Relations Committee, or did the United States intend to include restrictions on ballistic missiles in this agreement?
Well, it does include. In fact, it's under Chapter 7 and enforceable, therefore, under the United Nations, Article 41. And there are restrictions within this agreement. And I would also comment on the earlier question that the defensive weapons are not covered by the embargo. So the S-300, for instance, from Russia is not covered anyway.
I do have to ask another question, Secretary Kerry. Given the fact that one of the problems that we've got with Iran, one of the reasons why we're so concerned about Iran getting nuclear weapons, has to do with the fact that this is a roguish state, a state that has made not only threats, but taken aggressive actions toward the United States and her allies, has made threats to wipe Israel off the map, for example. There are real reasons why we don't want them getting nuclear arms. In light of the fact that that's the biggest reason why we're so concerned, why we're willing to enter into negotiations to possibly lift sanctions against Iran, giving Iran a big economic benefit. Why on earth didn't we insist as a condition precedent to getting any deal at all that Iran, for the love of God, cease and desist from its terrorist ambitions, cease and desist from making comments like that it wants to wipe Israel off the map, cease and desist from undertaking and funding acts of terrorism against the United States and her allies?
Well, as was mentioned earlier, so look, it would be great and ideal if one could negotiate that. I'm not sure how long it would take.
It should take however long it has to take. That is the reason we have sanctions in place.
And given the imperatives that we had with respect to Iran's 19,000 centrifuges, 12,000 kilograms of weapons fissile material equal to 10 to 12 bombs already, their mastering of the fuel cycle, and their near imminent finishing of the Iraq reactor, which would have produced weapons-grade plutonium at the rate of 2 weapons a year, we felt that we had to keep this targeted on the greatest threat of all that you've just defined, which is the potential of their having a nuclear weapon. And if indeed they're meaning to translate their slogans of death to America, death to Israel into policy, then getting rid of the nuclear weapon is everybody's first imperative here. So that's what we focused on, because
Except that this treaty that you unconstitutionally struck with Iran is not limiting the amount of time it will take. They will have a nuke within 10 years thanks to this deal.
we knew that you could get tangled up. Our definition, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist.
No, that is wrong. A freedom fighter attacks the government. It attacks military operations. A terrorist attacks civilians. It causes terror for the purposes of political gain.
You can be fighting forever on the issue of Sunni, Shia, definitions of who's protecting whom, and you won't get anywhere. You literally will not get there. That's why we separated those activities. Now,
No, that's not what we're talking about. This isn't about Sunni or Shia Muslims. This is about you, unconstitutionally, striking a deal with a state sponsor of terrorism.
that does not reduce our commitment, as we've defined here again and again, to push back on every one of those activities. But it's easier to push back against an Iran that doesn't have a nuclear weapon than one that does.
Senator Manchin has.
You still have to get the consent of the Senate, John. You can't just do whatever you want because it's easier. But you dismiss the Constitution because it doesn't fit your agenda.
For 228 years, the Constitution provided a way out of that mess by allowing treaties to be with the advice and consent of 67 U.S. senators. Why is this not considered a treaty?
Well, Congressman, I spent quite a few years trying to get a lot of treaties through the United States Senate, and frankly, it's become physically impossible.
That is the entire point. The Senate is supposed to be slow and inefficient. It is supposed to be extremely difficult to get anything passed through the Senate.
That's why. Because you can't pass a treaty anymore.
No, it is very easy to get something through the Senate if you have the support of 2/3 of the senators, as outlined in the Constitution.
And it's become impossible to, schedule. It's become impossible to pass.
That is because your political opponents, John, the Republicans, control both houses of Congress. Just because the Democrats control the executive branch does not mean they can do whatever they want.
And I sat there leading the charge on the Disabilities Treaty, which fell to basically ideology and politics. So I think that's the reason
You
why.
could be proposing legislation that would cure cancer, and if it does not get the support of both houses of Congress, then it should not be passed.
But let's say Congress doesn't take your advice. We override a veto. And the law that's triggered then imposes certain sanctions. Will you follow the law even though you think it violates this agreement clearly, and even if you think it's absolutely terrible policy?
I can't begin to answer that at this point without consulting with the President and determining what the circumstances are.
John, Representative Sherman is a Democrat. He is on your side of the aisle. If you cannot answer him a simple question of will you follow the law or not, then you should not be in any position that has any political power in this country.
So you're not committed to following the law
No, I
if you think
said
it's a
I'm
bad
not
law?
going to deal with a hypothetical, that's all. I'd like the Secretary of Treasury to respond.
John, the hypothetical was not some convoluted scheme to get you to admit something you don't want to. It was literally just, will you follow the law or will you not? During the last 8 years that the Obama administration has been in power, it has repeatedly ignored the separation of powers and the Constitution that make America what it is. Hello everyone, I know my video editing is not the best and my audio is pretty bad, but if you could please like and subscribe and leave a comment, let me know how I'm doing, let me know what I could do better, just tell me anything you want to know and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. Thank you, see you next time.